Good morning and welcome to Practical Christian Lessons. I am Joshua Pearsall, and today we are reading through Jacob Arminius. Let's get into it. So, if you are new here, welcome to reading of Jacob Arminius. I recommend getting some headphones and getting some music on in the background that's wordless, that's not going to distract you. Normally here on the channel, we'll just read and not have any commentary. So I'll have headphones on for just some nice wordless background music so it's not distracting. For myself, I don't want to play music that would distract another reader, or listener in this case, up to you. And I link in the doobly-doo below a free online copy of what we're reading from, so you can follow along if you so choose, or you can just listen. That's how we've been doing it. And I'll go through in parts and just record, till I hit a nice stopping point, and depending on how much time I have available in the day. To everyone who's been a regular viewer, or if you're new and when you get to the end of this, like what we're going through and want to hear more, I do have a question here for everyone who's regular in the series. And that is, would you prefer trying something new in how we do the recordings here? If you're listening on Spotify, go comment on YouTube, and I'll more likely see it on YouTube. I don't always remember to check Spotify. What we normally do is we'll read through, a small portion and put out a video every 2-ish weeks. The idea I've had recently is, instead of doing that, where I'll read through X amount and then put it out every 2 weeks, is just over, however long it'll take me, sitting down and recording the entire section. So right now we're going through the 31 articles of defense on Jacob Arminius, where he's defending himself against false accusations. These first ones, of course, are going to be broken up because that's how we've been doing it. What could have been an option instead would have been recording all 31 at once. Moving forward, we could do that, especially once we get through the articles and get to the disputations or the 9 questions at the end of these articles, right? Recording all 9 questions at once, recording a whole disputation, and then editing together and putting it out as one video. If that is something you guys would prefer, just comment and let me know. If you prefer doing it over this split up way, and it takes a lot longer to get through Jacob Arminius this way, but of course you can get more bite-sized pieces. If you'd rather have the bigger, longer ones, just let me know. And the benefit, of course, would be we're going to get through it a lot faster. That would be the benefit here. But for everyone who's listening, the reason we are reading through Jacob Arminius, and we read through stuff from John Wesley or Thomas Oden, summarizing John Wesley in a systematized way, is because I'm really wanting to push people to read Jacob Arminius, John Wesley, and whoever else we're going through. Especially in my own movement, I'm a Methodist, because we need some conversations and serious changes on things in the modern Methodism, and a large part of that is going back to our sources. Arminianism has always been a strain within Methodism. It's been the dominant strain. So we need to read Jacob Arminius. We need to read John Wesley. We need to read the church fathers that are the flow of tradition we're following from there. And of course, we need to be reading the scriptures every day. So let me know, to all of you who are our viewers here, and to everyone else. Let's get into listening to Jacob Arminius here. We are on Article 4 today. Faith is not an effect of election, but it is a necessary requisite foreseen by God in those who are to be elected, and the decree concerning the bestowing of faith precedes the decree of election. Of this article, there are 2 entire members, or 2 points. 1, in the first of them, 3 assertions are included. Faith is not an effect of election. Faith is a necessary requisite in those who are to be elected or saved, and this requisite is foreseen by God in the persons to be elected. I confess all of these, when rightly understood and correctly explained, agree entirely with my opinion on the subject. But the last of the members is proposed in terms too odious, since it makes no mention of God, whose benefit and gift I acknowledge faith to be. I will now proceed to explain myself on each of these assertions. 1. With regard to the first, the word election is ambiguous, for it either signifies the election by which God determines to justify believers, while those who are unbelievers or workers are rejected from righteousness and salvation, or it signifies the election by which he determines to save certain particular persons as such and to bestow faith on them in order to their salvation, other particular persons being also rejected merely in reference to there being such particular individuals. Election is received according to this latter signification by those who charge me with these articles. I take it in the former acceptation, according to Romans 9:11. For the children being not yet born, neither having done any good nor evil, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him that calleth. It was said unto her, the elder shall serve the younger. I will not now enter into a prolix disputation whether or not the sense in which I receive it be the correct one. It is evident, at least, that there is some decree of God by which he determines to justify believers, and which, since it excludes unbelievers from righteousness and salvation, is appropriately called the decree according to election or with election, as being that which does not include all men within its embrace. This decree I consider as the foundation of Christianity, of man's salvation, and of his assurance of salvation. And it is of this which the Apostle treats in the 9th, 10th, and 11th chapters of his epistle to the Romans, and in the first chapter to the Ephesians. But I have not yet declared what my sentiments in general are about that decree by which God is said to have determined absolutely to save certain particular persons, and to bestow faith upon them in order to their salvation, while others are reprobated from salvation and faith. Although I have confessed that there is a certain decree of God, according to which he determines to administer the means to faith and salvation, as he knows them to be suitable and proper to his righteousness, mercy, and severity. From these premises it is deducted as a most manifest consequence that faith is not in effect of that election by which God determines to justify those who believe. With regard to the second assertion, from the particulars thus explained, it is concluded that faith is a necessary requisite in those whom shall be the partakers of salvation according to the election of God, or that it is a condition prescribed and required by God to be performed by those who shall obtain his salvation. This is the will of God, that whosoever believeth in the Son hath eternal life. He that believeth not shall be condemned. The propositions contained in this passage cannot be resolved into any other than this brief one, which is likewise used in the scripture, believe and thou shalt be saved, in which the word believe has the force of a demand or requirement, and the phrase thou shalt be saved has that of cessation, by means of a good that is promised. This truth is so clear and perspicuous that the denial of it would be a proof of great perversity or of extreme unskillfulness. If anyone say it is a condition, but yet an evangelical one, which God may himself perform in us, or, as it is better expressed, which he may by his grace cause us to perform, the man who speaks thus does not contradict this truth, but confirms it when he adds this explanation, of what description soever that condition may be. With regard to the third, I say that we must distinguish between the condition by which it is required, that by which it is performed, and that by which it is seen and or foreseen as performed. This third member, therefore, is proposed in a manner much too confused. Yet when this confusion is corrected by the distinction which we have stated, nothing of absurdity will be apparent even in that member, because foreseeing or seeing, in the very nature and order of things, follows the performance itself. The performance has its own causes into which it is to be resolved, and the efficiency of those causes is not necessary unless faith be prescribed and required by the law of faith and the gospel. Since therefore faith is said to be foreseen by God in those who are to be saved, those causes without the intervention of which there could be no faith are not removed, but are rather appointed. Among those causes, I consider the preventing, accompanying, and succeeding subsequent grace of God as the principal, and I say with Fulgentius, those persons will be saved, where they have been predestined and elected, who God foreknew would believe by the assistance of his preventing grace. I add, and of his accompanying grace, and would persevere by the aid of his subsequent grace. In his first member, then, there is nothing except the truth of the greatest purity. Just a quick note here, preventing does not mean stopping. This is something that you'll notice in Older English and throughout the works of Jacob Arminius. Sometimes words might sound funny. It's because they probably are. This is not modern English. Preventing here is what many Methodists or Wesleyans will call prevenient grace. It's the same term. It means the grace that goes ahead of, the grace that goes before, that sort of prepares the way. So it's very much not what it means in this Older English here. Back to Jacob Arminius here. The second member is the decree concerning the gift of faith precedes the decree of election, in the explanation of which I employ the same distinction as in the former, and say the decree of election, by which God determines to justify and save believers, precedes the decree concerning the bestowment of faith. For faith is unnecessary, nay, it is useless without this previous decree. And the decree of election, by which God resolves to justify and save this or that particular person, is subsequent to that decree, according to which he determines to administer the means necessary and efficacious to faith. That is, the decree concerning the gift of faith. If anyone says God wills first absolutely to save some particular person, and since he wills that, he also wills to bestow faith on him, because without faith it is not possible for him to be saved, I tell him that he lays down contradictory propositions, that God wills absolutely to save someone without regard to faith, and yet that according to the will of God he cannot be saved without faith. Through the will of God it has been revealed to us, without faith it is impossible for any man to please God or to be saved. There is, therefore, in God no other will by which he wills one to be absolutely saved without consideration to faith. For contradictory wills cannot be attributed to God. If any person replies, God wills the end before he wills the means leading to the end, but salvation is the end, and faith the means leading to the end, I answer, first, salvation is not the end of God, but salvation and faith are the gifts of God, bound and connected together in this order between themselves through the will of God, that faith should precede salvation, both with regard to God, the donor of it, and in reality. Secondly, faith is a condition required by God to be performed by him who shall be saved, before it is means of obtaining that salvation. Since God will not bestow salvation on anyone except on him who believes, man is on this account incited to be willing to believe, because he knows that his chief good is placed in salvation. Man, therefore, tried by faith as the means to attain salvation as the end, because he knows that he cannot possibly obtain salvation except through that means. And this knowledge he does not acquire except through the declaration of the divine will, by which God requires faith from those who wish to be saved. That is, by which he places faith as a condition in the object, that is, in the person to be saved. Hello, welcome to this little sort of ad here in the middle here. I am Joshua Pearsall. If you are just jumping into this video, maybe partway through, we do a lot of stuff here at Practical Christian Lessons. We do history, we do theology, we do apologetics, and we do it all for free. And we want to keep it that way here. There's no plans on monetizing this channel. There's no plans on sort of locking anything behind paywalls. Everything I do, I intend to, if possible, put it in the public domain or make as cheaply available as possible, or maybe hopefully in the future having print things available and digital copies available for free or for a drastically reduced cost. Only God knows future. But you can help us now and partner with us in ministry. You can go to our Substack and become a subscriber there. That's how you could financially support. Otherwise, we're happy. Don't worry about money. We're happy just to have you here following along. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and join us here at Practical Christian Lessons, pushing people towards scriptural holiness, pushing for truth in a world that is chaotic, and wanting to bring hope of the gospel to people in the ways we can. Thank you. Before we get into Article 5 here, especially on this and Article 4, if you want Jacob Arminius' more mature views on the on predestination, go and look at our video, and I'll even hit here so you can see where it is here, the Declaration of Sentiments. It's here in the same website. All you gotta do is hit this little thing here and you'll see it right there. We have videos of reading through with commentary, unlike most of the series, on the entire parts of that. And it's available in several places free online, not just here on Christian Classics, their library. But I recommend getting, you'll see it in the series, Stephen Gunter's translation. He translates it from the original Dutch and has his own commentary, whereas this text is translated from the Latin translation of the Dutch. So it's a translation of translation. So it's got some differences there. And of course, the commentary can be helpful in understanding that. Back here to Article 5. Not among things contingent can be said to be necessarily done in respect to the divine decree. This is some philosophical jargon, necessarily meaning by necessity, or it must be. So, and contingent is like, if X, then Y. It's something that happens in relation to something else. So it's like a, if I open the door, the water bucket on top falls down. Not going to have a lot of those clarifying things throughout this series, so feel free, if you need help, ask in the comments, look things up, have conversation. My opinion concerning necessity and contingency is that they can never be applicable at once to one and the same event. But I speak of the necessity and contingency that are both of the same kind, not those which are different in their genus. The schoolmen state that there is one necessitas consequentis, an absolute necessity, and another necessitas consequentiae, a hypothetical necessity. The former is when the necessity arises from a cause antecedent to the thing itself, before the thing itself, but necessitas consequentia, a hypothetical necessity, arises from certain premises or principles antecedent to the conclusion. A consequent or absolute contingency cannot consist with a consequent or absolute necessity, nor can they meet together in one event. In the same manner, one conclusion cannot be both necessary and contingent in regard to its consequence. That is, it cannot have at the same time a necessity and a contingency that are hypothetical. But the cause why one thing cannot be necessary and contingent at the same time is this, that what is necessary and what is contingent divide the whole amplitude of being. For every being is either necessary or contingent, but those things which divide the whole of being cannot coincide or meet together in any single being. Otherwise, they would not divide the whole range of being. What is contingent and what is necessary likewise differ in their entire essences and in the whole of their definition. For that is necessary which cannot possibly not be or not be done. For that is necessary which cannot possibly not be or not be done. And that is contingent which is possible not to be or to be done. Thus, contradictorily are they opposed to each other. And this opposition is infinite, and therefore always dividing truth from falsehood. As this thing is either a man or it is not a man, it is not possible for anything to be both of these at once. That is, it is impossible for anything of one essence. Otherwise, in another sense, Christ is a man as proceeding from his mother Mary. He is not a man in reference to his having been begotten from the Father from all of eternity. But these are two things and two natures. But they say it is possible for one and the same event to be necessary and contingent in different respects. Necessary with regard to the first cause, which is God, and contingent in respect to the second causes. I answer first, those things which differ in their entire essences do not coincide in respects. Secondly, the necessity of contingency of an event is to be estimated, not from one cause, but from all the causes united together. For after 10 causes have been fixed, from which a thing is produced, not necessarily but contingently, if one be added from which the thing may be necessarily completed, the whole of that thing is said to have been done not contingently but necessarily. Because when all these causes were together appointed, it was impossible for that thing to hinder itself from being produced and from being brought into existence. That thing, I confess indeed, when distinctly compared by our mind with each of its causes, has a different relation to them respectively. But since none of those causes is the total cause of that event, and since all of them united together from the total cause, the thing ought itself to be accounted and declared to have been done from the total cause, either necessarily or contingently. It is not only a rash saying, but a false and an ignorant one, that a thing which, in regard to second causes, is done contingently, is said to be done necessarily in regard to the divine decree. For the divine decree itself, being an internal action of God, is not immediately the cause of a thing, but whatever effects it may produce. It performs them by power, according to the mode of which a thing will be said to be either necessarily or contingently. For if God resolves to use an irresistible power in the execution of his decree, or if he determines to employ such a quantum of power as nothing can resist or hinder it from completing his purpose, it will follow that the thing will necessarily be brought into existence. Thus, the wicked men who persevere in their sins will necessarily perish. For God will by an irresistible force cast them down into the depths of hell. But if he resolves to use a force that is not irresistible, but that can be resisted by the creature, then that thing is said to be done not necessarily but contingently, although its actual occurrence was certainly foreknown by God, according to the infinity of his understanding, by which he knows all results whatever that will arise from certain causes which are laid down, and whether those causes produce a thing necessarily or contingently. From whence the schoolmen say that all things are done by a necessity of infallibility, which phrase is used in the determinate sense, although the words in which its enunciation is expressed are ill chosen. For infallibility is not an affection of a being, which exists from causes, but it is an affection of a mind that sees or foresees what will be the effect of certain causes. But I readily endure a catachristic metalepsis when it is evident concerning a thing, although it is my wish with our enunciations that our enunciations were always the best accommodated to the nature of the things themselves. But the inventors of these articles try to prove by the examples which they produce that one and the same thing, which, with respect to second causes, is done contingently, is, in respect to the divine decree, done necessarily. They say it was possible for the bones of Christ to be broken or not be broken. It was possible for them to be broken if any person considers the nature of bones, for they were undoubtedly fragile. But if they could not be broken, if the decree of God be taken into the account, if in answer to this, I deny that in respect to the divine decree they could not be broken. For God did not decree that it was impossible for them to be broken, but that they should not be broken. This is apparent from the manner in which the transaction was actually conducted. For God did not employ an irresistible power by which he might prevent the bones of Christ from being broken by those who approached to break them, but by a mild kind of suasion, he caused that they should not will to break the bones of Christ, by an argument drawn from its inutility. For since Christ had already given up the ghost before those who had broke the legs arrived at the cross, they were not at all inclined to undertake a vain and fruitless labor in breaking the legs of our Savior, because the breaking of legs, with the design to hasten death, was only done lest the body should remain suspended on the cross on a festival or sacred day, contrary to the divine law. Indeed, if the divine wisdom knows how to effect that which it has decreed, by employing causes according to their nature and motion, whether their nature and motion be contingent or free, the praise due to such wisdom is far greater than if it employ a power which no creature can possibly resist. Although God can employ such a power whensoever it may seem expedient to his wisdom. I am therefore of my opinion that I committed no offense when I said, no contingent thing, that is, nothing which is done or has been done contingently, can be said to have been done necessarily with regard to the divine decree. And that is just where Arminius' scholastic influence and training there is super apparent if it hasn't popped up at other times as you're going through the series, and that will continue to pop up in various things. Some things he writes are much easier to understand, like his Declaration of Sentiments. It is written geared towards a more general audience because he's defending himself before the Hague, which is, back when their state and church were the same, it's still a more secular side, laity level audience. So he is going to be explaining it in simpler terms than he's necessarily using when he's having these conversations with other scholastics. So just be aware of that. Different works of Jacob Arminius are going to be at very different levels of terminology being used. But if you're wondering why he's using such fancy terminology, though the stereotype that philosophers often use extremely big words to make simple things more complex than they need to be, there's a fair level of truth to that stereotype. It's also just helpful when you're having dialogues with other people who are familiar with these terms, because it allows you to use less words. It allows dialogues to happen much quicker. So, and saving space and saving time matters for a fair amount of reasons in these types of conversations. So that's why terms like this get made up. You'll get one word to describe like an entire sentence of thought, or maybe even longer or maybe shorter, just depending. That's just how these things work out. So if words sound strange in there, feel free to look them up or ask questions. That's where we're going to leave it here. If you want to catch us live, at least for the summer, we will be doing live streams on Mondays. They're geared towards my ministry work in a ministry called Striving Side by Side, and I'll be focusing on Protestant apologetics. So if that's not your cup of tea, don't worry about it. If that is your cup of tea, join us on Monday nights. It'll be 7:30 p.m., roughly Central Standard Time. And if not, we'll see you in the next video. You guys have a wonderful day. God bless.